Hey guys, welcome to my channel, welcome to my show. In today's video, we will be contrasting the statements and declaration of Paul that he made to Ananias, the high priest of the Sanhedrin of Jerusalem, where he was taken by a commander. This occurrence is between the chapters 22, 30 to chapter 23, 1 to 6. In these verses lie captured what Paul said to the Sanhedrin high priest. His name was Ananias. Now he's not the same guy who purported or claimed to have seen Paul's, the scales that fell off Paul's eyes. That's another guy. I've recorded a video on that. Ananias. Nobody knows who that guy is except Paul. Nobody knows. Anyway, in this between these verses, chapter 22, 30 to chapter 23, 1 to 6, we will try to scrutinize what happened. We are going to investigate. We will examine deeply, and I'm sure it will throw up a lot of information that we are able to understand what happened at that time. Was Paul lying? Was Paul genuinely an apostle of Jesus? It's going to be evident by the time we finish this video. So I will recommend all of you to stay there. This concerns our salvation, guys, whether Paul was a genuine apostle of Jesus or was he a fraud, an impostor, a fake, a false apostle, the Antichrist. See guys, I've been on this guy's trail and tail since October or November of 2017 till today. I've spent days and sleepless nights examining, not all the days but many years, to examine how this guy operated, this Paul, whose name Paul. This word Paul, Jesus never uttered from his mouth in the whole Bible. That's a red flag way up. Nobody questioned why. Why didn't he even remotely say? In fact, he was using words like this: beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. Beware of the ravenous wolf from the tribe of Benjamin. This guy is from the tribe of Benjamin, Paul. They come in sheep's clothes. They are wolves, Jesus said. So instead of examining, vetting, investigating Paul, we lapped up everything he said. And this section is yet one of the controversial things he says. To me, it's not a controversy. It is what it is. But I'll leave it to you. I want your participation. For the unversed, I put a lot of links to several of my videos. They've exceeded 300 when I started this video ministry way back in 2021. Mostly revolve around exposing the false apostle Paul. Not only that, I've always pointed towards the red-lettered words or the words of Jesus Christ in Bible. He was the Messiah, not this Paul. Like I said, Jesus never mentioned his name. He never uttered the word grace from his mouth, which Paul taught. Did you know, guys, how many times Paul used the word grace? 110 times. In the New Testament, Jesus the Messiah, 0. Then how will he save us? Saved by grace through faith, and not by works, lest no man may boast, as Paul taught in Ephesians 2:8-9, and almost throughout his so-called ministry of Paul. He kept teaching, saved by grace. Jesus rejected this on the day of judgment. I've said hundreds of times in almost all of my videos. On the last day, judgment day, Jesus provided in Matthew 25:31 to 46. Read it. Did he use? If he has said he will not use, do you think he will change his mind and use? What? The criteria of grace, saved by grace through faith? No, he rejected it. He cannot do anything contrary to the Father. If you love me, keep my commands. If you love me, keep my commands. That's Jesus 6 times in the Last Supper. Why? Moments before he folded up his ministry and went away to the cross. Why did he say, if you love me, keep my commands? Was he joking? Was he just lying, blowing hot air? No, that's what it is. If you love me, keep him. He says, you are not my disciples or even my followers if you do not keep or my friends also, if you don't keep my commands. That's throughout the Bible. Jesus said what the Father taught, we have to learn to obey. Okay? Guys, use this sermon or this sharing, I won't call it a sermon, it's just a sharing on Sundays if you would like. Today, if you would like, repeat it a couple of times that you may know how Paul was operating. How was he? The words he was using. What was he saying? Read, if you still want to read this false apostle Paul, the Antichrist to come was this guy. Because that Antichrist was already there. John reveals it. Check out my videos, and even if you don't want to check out my videos, check what John says. The Antichrist, and who's already here, he says, while John was teaching. This was days and months after Jesus. The Antichrist was here. Nobody asked who was this Antichrist. I'm not saying. John says, Apostle John, and who's already here. I made videos on that. Check out on my videos, guys. So upon a close scrutiny and examination of this incident, I spoke about, guys, between chapter 22, 32, chapter 23, 1 to 6. We will examine the words of Paul and contrast these words with the words of Christ. Now we're going to put them side by side. So you know the truth. I know it, and I've shared through hundreds of videos. I want you to also know. We want to know what happened, how we got deceived. And why did we even get deceived when it was abundantly clear? Like in verses like this. Why didn't anybody ask? How did the churches keep on teaching? What happened to the Bible scholars? Why did they accept this man, Paul? I do not understand. It defeats my intelligence. As Michael Corleone says, and makes him very angry. It upsets his intelligence, makes him angry. Remember? It does bother me. It does, the small guy, Rajesh Sahu. It really, really hurts me. Why was this not found out? Was it left to ones like me? Maybe. What was hidden from the wise was revealed to the babes, says Jesus. That's the only reason or the explanation I have when it is abundantly and evidently clear. Now Paul is addressing a hostile, I'm now taking you to the context of what happened in these chapters. Closing on chapter 22 and moving to Acts. This is in Acts 22. So, and whenever I said, please read chapter 22 of Acts. 22:32, Acts chapter 23, 1 to 6. Paul is addressing a hostile, this is the context. Paul is addressing a hostile Jewish crowd, and they were hostile for a good reason. Don't think that the brothers Jewish, we are grafted on that tree, be careful. Whoever blesses them will be blessed, whoever curses them will be cursed. Paul tried to divide the flock into two. Jesus wanted to get the two flocks together, right? Now, the hostile Jewish crowd is hostile for a reason. This man had killed God's eternal law. The law of God is eternal forever and ever, says Jesus. Matthew 4, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. What does that mean? In Matthew 5, 17, 18, he says the whole universe can crash, burn and disappear. Not a single jot or a tittle, not a bit of my Father God's eternal law can ever go. He says that. Luke 16, 17, the same thing. Now David says tens of times, to read Psalms 119. Let me give you few, 150, 151, Psalms 119, 160, Psalms 111, 7 and 8, Psalms 19, 7 to 11. All these places David repeatedly says the law of God is eternal, magnificent, forever and ever. What happened to that forever and ever law? Paul comes and kills in few hundred years. What is an eternity, guys? Some of you, most of you will know eternity is billion times, trillion times, zillion times, more zillions, and yet you can't reach. That is eternity. What happened? In 300-400 years, like a speck of sand out of a whole beach. In that little lesser time, Paul wiped it out in Ephesians 2:15, Colossians 2:14, called the land, the law of God is abolished. And he was teaching that, and that is why the brothers, the Jewish brothers, got furious. Correctly so. They should have killed Paul, and they tried to. He almost died. I wish this man had died. So the greatest deception known in the history of mankind, where billions were deceived and stand deceived, was done by Paul. This was carried out by Paul. So they were furious at Paul for teaching the blasphemy. What is this? This is high treason against Father God. Your law is dead. When Jesus says, I am not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill and implement it to the fullest. Implementation, and in fact, the word he used, fulfillment, is the opposite of what Paul taught, abolishment. You check it out, guys, in the dictionary. What will Antichrist anyway teach? The opposite. So this guy, Paul, is addressing a hostile Jewish crowd who are suspicious of his teachings and actions. They were. Now this chapter, especially 23, provides a detailed account of 22, Paul's conversion story, which is also mentioned in Acts 9. As Paul explains his ministry to the Gentiles, the crowd becomes increasingly agitated and eventually demands his arrest. I'm giving you a synopsis of what happened, so you know what led to Paul lying to the Sanhedrin. Cat is out of the bag. He lied, and it is now recorded, and you will know. But I want to give you a fair chance to understand what was happening here, right? As Paul explains his ministry to the Gentiles, the crowd becomes agitated, eventually demands his arrest. But the commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews. But the commander there was a Roman. He wanted to know why. He didn't understand the law of Jews, but he was confused. So what he did was, he released Paul and ordered the chief priests and all members of the Sanhedrin to assemble. Sanhedrin of Jerusalem. Then the commander brought Jerusalem and had him stand before them. This is 22:30. Now you know what was happening. Before we go any further, guys, I want you to explain what is Sanhedrin. So you know what is Sanhedrin, because the commander saved Paul's life from hostile Jews who were hostile for a reason. If I was there and if I had a gun, I would have shot him through the head and put few in his heart, bullets. Even as Christians, Jesus said to fully obey. Man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Where did he kill? God's law. Who can dare touch? He himself says, Jesus, nobody can dare touch my Father's law. He taught us how to fulfill it, not to abolish it. Anyway, Sanhedrin is I was explaining what is Sanhedrin for those who are unversed. It is a Jewish court of law and the administrative body we find in the Bible. The term Sanhedrin comes from the Greek word council of sitting together. So the Sanhedrin was basically the supreme court of ancient Israel. And the commander, who wasn't sure why the Jews were accusing, because he didn't know the law, importance of law, we know. And this man was brought in front of the supreme court of Israel, called the Sanhedrin, in Jerusalem. It had the power to try the king, extend the boundaries of Jerusalem and the temple, and declare war. So it was a very powerful body. Now, visualize Paul being brought there. The Sanhedrin was made up of local elites, including scribes, Pharisees, members of the high priest family, and elders. So that bunch of these people. And because this will figure in later on, who were the Pharisees? Paul said, I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees. The Pharisees were a prominent Jewish religious group who clashed with Jesus over interpretations of the law. So Pharisees were in the law, they understood, and they were also part of Sanhedrin. Alright, so now let's read from Acts 22 or Acts 23, 1-6. Pay attention, guys, this is very important. I'm giving you a very detailed version of what happened. This is not fast food or instant coffee. that immediately it's Bible is large, the deception is humongous, and it has lasted 2000 long years. False deception that he was a genuine apostle was not the case. Jesus never uttered the word. Paul, saved by grace through faith, was not used. On the day of judgment, this was all rejected. Paul himself says in 2 Corinthians 12:16, the crafty fellow I, Paul, am, I took you in by deception or deceit. He himself confessed. I've compiled his words in a video called Damning Confessions of the False Apostle Paul. The link is there in this very video's description section. Take time out, read, understand what has happened. We are not very far from the damnation if we are going to continue to study Paul and implement saved by grace through faith. It is nothing but blasphemy, it is heresy. It is killing the law of God. Jesus taught us how to obey the law. We have to study the entirety of the New Testament, not just Paul. He should have never been there. He had no witnesses when he claimed that he got converted on the way to Damascus. He has zero witnesses. He was his own witness, or name the witnesses who saw it, except for those bunch of murderers who were with him, who had recently tasted the blood of the angel called Stephen, and proceeding out to Damascus to get more back Jews who had fled the persecution, the brutal version, the murderous Pharisee Paul, to get them back to Jerusalem where he would have likely murdered them. Anyway, those were his witnesses. What are their names? He had no witnesses, guys, nothing. Alright, so we got this, the Sanhedrin, right? And now Paul is standing there. So what's going on? Let's read that. He was brought into the Sanhedrin. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, now he's addressing the people gathered there, the law body of Sanhedrin. My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day. Okay. So this is his opening statement. My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day. Now, the other, if you read different texts, what it says is Paul is telling the Sanhedrin that he has lived his life, entire life, with a good conscience. Nothing wrong in that, right? Well, according to me, everything is wrong here. He says he has lived his life in good conscience to God. This is what he's saying. So according to me, this is a very strange statement. What he's saying, I'm quoting New King James Version, is Paul looked earnestly at the council. He looked earnestly. It's anyway, NKJV is more reliable than NIV. Then Paul looked earnestly at the council and said, men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day, which I said, until this day, all my life. And now I will contrast these words with Paul's some other words, but let me read the passage and remain with me, guys. 35, we sit for 45 minutes, 40 minutes every Sunday, don't we? What do we get? Paulian doctrine, saved by grace through faith, which was rejected by Jesus. So why do they teach Matthew 25, 31, 46, Revelation 20, 11, 15? All that was used and will be used on the day of judgment is works. What did John the Baptist say? The axe is at the root of the tree. Whichever tree does not bear good fruit will be chopped and thrown into fire. And this same John the Baptist in John 3:36 says, whoever believes in Jesus is saved, but whoever does not obey the Son of God will not make it. He will have to face condemnation on the day of judgment. Let me read. I paraphrased. I will be using NASB. The one who believes in the Son has eternal life, John the Baptist warns, but the one who does not obey the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God remains on that person. So that's opposite of what Paul was teaching. So all this has to be wrong. If Paul is right, Jesus has to be wrong, James has to be wrong, because he says faith is dead, you fools, without good works. He says that 3 times. John 2, James 2, 20, 24, 26, I believe. Go through James 2. So all these people have to be wrong if Paul was right. So that's why I'm saying, I'm wondering why didn't they catch this, what we are discussing today. So let's go back and catch at 23:1. Paul looked earnestly at Sanhedrin and said, I have lived a life of good conscience to God until today, all my life. At this, the high priest Ananias, and high priest was Ananias, ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. He was not a fool. Ananias knew this man has just taught, he came abolishing the law of God. Ananias wasn't a fool. He knew the law was eternal. It is written by David. Jesus says the same thing. So he knew, even if he didn't believe in Jesus, David is a better witness than Paul. Of course, Jesus confirms it. Check out Matthew 4:4, Matthew 5:17, 18. So he ordered, slap this man hard. I'm so happy they snapped the snot out of Paul. Good job, guys. I wish they had killed him. Then Paul said to him, then Paul retorted immediately. Look, this is what he says. So the high priest Ananias commanded those standing beside him to strike him hard on the mouth, and they did it. Then Paul said to him, Ananias, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Now, stop here, okay? So this is how he retorted at what? At the high priest. Those who were standing near Paul said, how dare you insult God's high priest? So Paul knew he had made a blunder, because Exodus 22:28 prohibits that you do not speak evil about the ruler of the people. High priest was the ruler. He was the chief of the Supreme Court of the Sanhedrin, was the Supreme Court of Jerusalem, and Paul knew it's like, I made a big blunder. So Paul replied, brothers, I did not realize that Ananias was the high priest. Now, wait guys, wait. If I am in the court, I will say, stop. I will try to address the jury and the judge. Look guys, this man is a Pharisee. He knows what Sanhedrin is all about. He has been there 100 times. It was consisting of partly Pharisees. This man knew what Sanhedrin is. Okay, layman, let's say I, Raj Sahu from India, I'm all at sea, but even I'm able to see the top guy, the high priest, because they dress up distinctly. There are people around them. You know who the judge is in a court. Can anybody say, I didn't know you are the judge of this court? This is what is happening. Do you believe this, guys? Especially from a man who has been to that court 100 times in his life, Paul. He's telling this is a lie, a blatant lie. Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your people. Exodus 22:28. So here he has lied and he's covering it up. I didn't know that of course you knew. You are lying because you cursed him. You cursed him. What did he curse him? You shut up, you whitewashed. What did he? Let me read what it. God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. So he cursed him or cursed him that you will die. God will kill you. And then he realized he had uttered kind of words against the law. So he quickly tried to lie to get him out of the soup he landed into. Okay? And he said that it is written, and I didn't know this guy, it is written in Exodus 22:28, you cannot, curse your rulers. So he lied here. Okay? But this is not the only lie we have caught of Paul. There is another greater lie here. greater lie, it will be exposed, guys, when we contrast Paul's words with the words of Christ in Matthew 5:43 verses 46. What does Jesus say in these words? He's on the Sermon on the Mount. He's on the Mount delivering his most expedient, most wonderful, awe-inspiring sermon. According, if you go by the chronology, likely his first major address as the Messiah to mankind. He tells us, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, this is Jesus telling us, all of us. He was addressing a huge mammoth crowd. So consider you're standing there. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, or bless those who persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father in heaven, who causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love only those who love you, what reward have you? Even the worst of the sinners do that. You know better. Paul is no better than the worst sinner, according to Jesus. Jesus had said, love your enemy, love your neighbor. And that was in the law. But Jesus said, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, bless those who persecute you. See, this is the difference. Jesus also says, if somebody strikes you, offer the other cheek. Instead of that and doing this, loving your enemy or making an effort to be calm and kind to them, if not love, at least bless them. Don't love them if you cannot, but bless your enemies. I do that daily, guys, relying on Jesus. But this man curses, you whitewashed wall. God will strike you. He has got down the curse. On whom? On the man who asked his subordinate to slap Paul on his face because he had lied that I have lived with a good conscience. Can I tell you? Can I contrast you with his other words so you may know what good conscience did Paul have throughout his life? What conscience did he live before God? As he claimed in Matthew 23:1, I've lived before God with good conscience. Let us contrast his words with his own words, so you may know how he was cheating and deceiving us and lying. He was a liar. I have compiled a video, guys, called The Damning Confessions of the False Apostle Paul. The link is there. I told you, please check it out. All I've done is compiled his own words. I have not put my words. Let's hear some of them. Paul says now that he has lived his life with in good conscience before God. But it is contradictory to some other things he said about his own self. For example, I will read out to you. He says, I am a murderer. Now, I will not be going everything. This will go to 2 hours. I am a murderer. You check it out. Acts 22:4. I will paste this in the description section of this also for your perusal. Like, check it out. Okay? I am a murderer. He says in Acts 22:4. I, Paul, am a murderer. He had murdered many people who were going to the Lord's newly formed church, the way, the first church. Untarnished, uncorrupted by this man, Paul. So he was so jealous and he had become so hostile. He was God hater. He was condemned by Jesus with fellow Pharisees in Matthew 23. Read it out, okay? So this guy, I'm just reading few. He is a murderer, he says in Acts 22:4. He confessed. He murdered those who were going to Christ. Many of them. Is this good conscience, guys? Did he live with a good conscience? You shall not murder was one of the top commandments out of the 10. And he murdered. He broke the commandments of God. What does Jesus say in Revelation, the end part of Revelation? All the murderers, stealers and liars will be left out. They will be condemned. He's condemning himself. What does he say? He's of a good conscience, right, before God. Really, Paul? I am a thief, he says in 2 Corinthians 11:8. I am a liar, he says in Romans 3:7. I am a crafty deceiver, he says in 2 Corinthians 12:16. And this is shocking. I am a blasphemer of God and the Spirit. This happened, blasphemy, before he became a Christian, before he appeared to the Sanhedrin. Is this living with a good conscience before God, or calling him a blasphemer? Not only did he call God a blasphemer per his words, where did he call it? Let's see. In Timothy 1:13. 1 Timothy 1:13, he says, I am a blasphemer of God. I blaspheme God and forced new believers also to blaspheme God and the Spirit. Acts 26:11. There you go. This man of good conscience who has lived his good. What life have you lived in good conscience, Paul? By blaspheming God of the universe. He never should have been here, guys. This is undoable sometimes. I hate this man so much because he has twisted the whole thing into a farce. Christianity has become a farce. We were grafted on the tree of Jews. We are a farce because we do not accept the law, that it is dead. How can we be grafted on the very foundation of God's principles and teachings and decrees? If you love me, keep my commands. Remember the words of Jesus. And one of the commands is, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. At least the 10 commandments have to be kept. And this man wiped it clean. Ephesians 2:15. And he blamed Jesus that he abolished. Read today. Whoever believes in Paul believes that Christ abolished Father God's law. Where he said the opposite. I have not come to abolish, come to fulfill. Fulfillment is the full implementation. It is the opposite of abolishment. Remember these things, guys. As if this is not enough, I'll close with this. He talks about being a chief of sinners in 1 Timothy. Is being chief of sinners living in good conscience, Paul? I beat and brutalize Christians, Acts 8:3. Is that good conscience, Paul? I force new believers to blaspheme God and the Spirit. Is that living in good? No, it is not in good conscience. I prevented many from going to Christ and be saved. I'm a deceiver, like I said in 2 Corinthians 12:16. Now, Paul is lying here also. Paul lied that he didn't recognize the high priest. He lied because he had just cursed the high priest Ananias. So he said, I didn't know. When you go inside a court, immediately, even a 14, 15-year-old kid knows who's the presiding officer, the judge. It's clear. They sit differently. Their whole countenance is different. Their image, and they're surrounded with people, important people. Paul was a Pharisee, guys. He used to frequent very often. That was their headquarters anyway. Jerusalem, Sanhedrin. I hope you got all this. I hope you got the point. This man was lying, and he says he's a liar. 3:7, Romans 3:7. But I won't go because this will go to an hour, 2 hours. I will recommend you see those 2 videos which I recommended. There are many others I don't even remember. I've sifted the Bible to, especially the New Testament, his 14 books including Hebrews, and from chapter 8 onwards in Acts. Till that time Acts is okay. From 8 it takes a plunge where Paul takes over. He enters like in Shakespeare's scene so and so. In this case he enters in Acts 8. So guys, I hope you like this video. If you did, share it with others. And even if you didn't like the video, please check the verses. Verses won't lie. They are what they are. They clearly indict Paul. They implicate this Antichrist, this false apostle, this impostor. Alright. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. God bless you all.